You know that crushing feeling when the people who are supposed to love and support you the most just don't believe in you? Not in your dreams, not in your choices, and especially not in the person you've chosen to build your life with? That's my story. It's a story about navigating a world that expects you to fit into a perfect box and what happens when you dare to build your own world, brick by painstaking brick, even when your own family is laughing at your foundation. If you've ever felt doubted, if you believe that doing good, living authentically, and trusting your gut brings its own kind of magic into the world, then this story is exactly for you. I know you're a good person, and that's why you're here. Please press that subscribe button, like this video to send a little positive energy out there, and drop your city in the comments below. Let's connect and build a community that believes in each other. My name is Anya Sharma, and I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a bustling, tight-knit Indian American community in New Jersey. Life for girls like me was supposed to follow a very specific, well-trodden path. Graduate with honors from a respectable university, ideally something Ivy League, or close to it. Secure a stable, prestigious career, doctor, lawyer, engineer, maybe finance if you were feeling a little wild. Marry young to a suitable boy from a good family, preferably someone your parents approved of, and start having kids soon after. The grand finale? Settle down geographically close enough for Sunday dinners and impromptu babysitting duties. I, however, seem to have missed the memo. Or perhaps I read it and politely, firmly, crumpled it up and threw it away. The first deviation came in college. While my peers were cramming for their MCATs and LSATs, I found myself drawn to the world of architecture and design. It felt right. Creative, challenging, a perfect blend of art and practicality. To my parents, Rajiv and Sunita Sharma, it felt like a hobby, a phase I would eventually outgrow and replace with something sensible. That was strike one. Strike two arrived a few years later. After getting my degree, I had the opportunity to pursue a master's program in urban planning in London. It was a chance to broaden my horizons, immerse myself in a new culture, and frankly, put some geographical distance between myself and the constant gentle and not so gentle pressure to conform. My parents were less than thrilled. London was so far. What about settling down? Who would I even meet there? They envisioned me meeting a nice Indian boy from a good East Coast family, not navigating the complexities of international dating. But I went anyway, and London was everything I hoped for. It was vibrant, diverse, and it allowed me to find my own rhythm, away from the constant hum of expectation. It was there, during a study abroad program in Stockholm, that I met Rohin. He was an aerospace engineer, brilliant and kind, with eyes that held the quiet depth of someone who spent a lot of time looking at the sky. He split his time between Sweden and Abu Dhabi, working on cutting-edge projects. Meeting Rohin was, in my parents' eyes, not just a deviation from the plan, but a complete derailment. He wasn't from our community. He wasn't even based in the U.S. When I finally told them about him, after nearly a year of us building something real and solid across continents, my mother's response was immediate and laced with suspicion. Ananya, are you sure he's real? Have you actually met his family? Why haven't we met him? The questions came rapid fire, each one a little jab of doubt. It was frustrating, disheartening, but not entirely surprising. They had always been skeptical of my independence, of my ability to make sound life choices outside of their prescribed boundaries. The biggest strike, the one that seemed to solidify their doubts into an unshakable conviction that I was living in a fantasy world, came when I told them Rohin and I were engaged. We had talked about it for months, built a future together in whispered phone calls and precious weeks spent in the same city. It felt natural, inevitable, and profoundly right. Telling my parents, however, felt like bracing for impact. Their reaction was worse than I anticipated. It wasn't just skepticism, it was outright disbelief, bordering on mockery. My father, usually the more stoic of the two, simply raised an eyebrow and changed the subject. My mother, on the other hand, became fixated on the fact that they hadn't met him. It became a running joke, a subtle and sometimes not so subtle jab in every conversation. Still haven't met this Rohin, huh? Maybe he's a spy, or make sure you get a picture with him. Ananya, just so we know he exists. It was hurtful, deeply so, but I tried to brush it off. I knew Rohan was real. I knew what we had was real. Their inability to see it was their problem, not mine. Fast forward to last winter. My cousin, Priya, who was 28 and the golden child of her generation, followed the script perfectly. Ivy League degree, promising career in medicine, engaged to a seemingly perfect man named Samir, a cardiologist from a family well known to ours. Their engagement party was the event of the year in our community. Held at a sprawling banquet hall in Edison, it was a lavish, multi-day affair designed to impress. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the elaborate decorations to the endless spread of food, the professional dancers, the intricate henna artists, even a live band playing traditional music during brunch. When the invitation arrived, I wasn't surprised. I was family, after all. What did sting a little was the handwritten note from my mother tucked inside. Hope your fiancé can make it this time, it read, followed by a little smiley face. The passive aggression was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rohan and I had already planned to be in the U.S. for a few weeks around the holidays. He had business meetings in New York, and we wanted to visit some friends in Philadelphia. We flew into Newark 2 days before the engagement party. Rohan had a last-minute meeting the afternoon of the event, but promised he'd meet me there by dinner. The plan was a little unconventional. A friend of Rohan's had offered him the use of his private jet for travel within the Northeast, and given the notorious New Jersey traffic, Rohan decided to fly directly to a small airport near the venue. I arrived at the banquet hall alone, dressed in a deep emerald green sari, my hair neatly pinned up, simple gold jewelry my only adornment. From the moment I walked in, the whispers started. The forced smiles, the tilted heads, the questions I had become so accustomed to at these family gatherings. Ananya, darling, so lovely to see you. Where is your friend? They couldn't even bring themselves to use the word fiancé. Still, and where is it? Abu Dhabi. Have you thought about freezing your eggs, dear? Time is ticking, you know. We just worry, Ananya. You're such a free spirit, but the but hung in the air, heavy with unspoken judgment. I smiled, I nodded, I bit my tongue until it ached. I posed for pictures with Priya, genuinely happy for her, trying to focus on celebrating her happiness and not the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. But then I heard it. My mother's distinctive laugh, louder than the rest, near the bar area. She was with her sister, Priya's mom, and a few other aunties. They were deep in conversation, and I could tell, even from a distance, that the topic was me. I edged closer, pretending to admire the floral arrangements. Honestly, my mother said, her voice dripping with amusement, I've stopped asking about him. She says he's in aviation. She paused, and the other aunties chuckled. What does that even mean? My mother continued. Is he a pilot? A flight attendant? She never shows us photos. I told Rajiv. Maybe he's imaginary. They erupted in laughter then, not polite, restrained chuckles, but booming, had thrown back laughter that carried across the room. It felt like a physical blow. Imaginary. They actually thought I had made him up to save face. The years of doubt, the dismissiveness, the subtle jabs, it all coalesced in that moment into a wave of humiliation and anger. I stood there, a glass of sparkling water trembling in my hand, feeling completely exposed and utterly alone. I should have walked away, found a quiet corner, composed myself. Instead, I stayed, rooted to the spot, letting their laughter wash over me. There was nothing I could say to them in that moment that would make a difference. But a quiet resolve began to settle within me. Later, after dinner, came the toasts. Priya's friends, Samir's cousins, even my younger brother, Nikhil, who I hadn't spoken to properly in months, all took turns at the microphone, sharing anecdotes and offering heartfelt wishes. Then the planner, perhaps running out of people who had prepared speeches, or maybe just following a list, looked my way. And now, a toast from the bride's cousin, Ananya. Everyone turned to look at me. I walked to the microphone, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes on me. I was wearing the emerald sari, feeling both elegant and incredibly vulnerable. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces, faces that had judged me, doubted me, and were now waiting, perhaps with a hint of morbid curiosity, to see what the free spirit with the imaginary fiancé would say. I hadn't prepared anything. I hadn't expected to be asked. But the words came anyway, quiet but clear in the hushed room. "I'll keep this short," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I just want to say it's beautiful. Watching two people who are supported, celebrated, and believed in." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of my parents for just a fleeting second. Not everyone gets that. So if you do hold on to it. There was a scattering of polite applause, a few murmurs, and then a new sound began to fill the air. A low thrumming at first, distant, then growing louder, more insistent, until it was unmistakable. It was the sound of rotor blades. People began to stir, looking around, confused. Priya's eyes widened, scanning the windows. The planner rushed towards the entrance, a look of bewildered annoyance on his face. And then Rohan walked in. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, a rich navy that contrasted beautifully with his olive skin. No tie, the collar of his shirt opened just slightly. His hair was a little windblown, as if he had just stepped out of the sky. He looked completely out of place in the opulent, crowded hall, but in a way that made everyone else seem slightly less significant. He had that quiet confidence about him, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, but filled the space nonetheless. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice calm, a slight grin playing on his lips. "Had a little trouble parking the helicopter." Someone in the crowd actually gasped. It was a soft, sharp intake of breath that cut through the lingering whispers. And then he walked directly towards me. He reached me, his eyes finding mine, and a soft smile spread across his face. He raised a hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from my cheek before leaning down and kissing my forehead. "Did I miss your toast?" he asked softly, his voice low, meant only for me. I looked up at him, at the man who was so utterly, undeniably real, standing here in this room full of people who had doubted his existence. A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, vindication, but most of all, love for this man who had just descended from the sky to stand by my side. "No," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "You're right on time." The atmosphere in the room had shifted palpably. The air, moments before thick with judgment and condescension, was now charged with curiosity and surprise. The skeptical glances were replaced by wide-eyed stares. People were leaning in, whispering not about my imaginary fiancé, but about the man who had just arrived by helicopter. Rohan, completely unruffled, began to politely introduce himself to the people closest to us. He extended a hand to my Aunt Priya's mother, who looked as if she was struggling to rearrange her facial expression from shock to polite welcome quickly enough. Her smile was strained, her eyes darting from Rohan to me and back again. Then he turned to my mother. Sunita Sharma, who moments before had been laughing about my imaginary partner, stood frozen, her hands fiddling with the edge of her sari. Her mouth was slightly open, caught somewhere between disbelief and a forced smile. Rohan greeted her warmly, his voice genuine. "Sunita Auntie," he said, extending his hand. "It's very nice to finally meet you." My mother took a beat, a long, awkward beat, before slowly, tentatively, accepting his handshake. "Oh," she stammered, "yes, of course. Hello." The tone was familiar. It was the one she used when she had to be civil to neighbors she didn't particularly like, the ones with noisy parties or unruly children. Rohan then turned to my father, Rajiv Sharma, who stood a few feet behind my mother, more composed but equally caught off guard. "Rajiv, uncle," Rohan said, giving a respectful nod. "I've heard so much about you." My father, ever the businessman, masked his surprise better. He offered Rohan a firm handshake, his expression carefully neutral. But I saw it, just a flicker in his eyes, a tightening around his jaw. He was assessing Rohan, evaluating him, the way he did with potential business partners or unfamiliar clients. "I understand you work in aviation," my father asked, his voice carefully measured. Rohan nodded easily. "Yes, mostly consulting now, projects across Europe, the Gulf, and Asia. But I still fly occasionally." He paused, a small smile playing on his lips. Keeps me grounded. Ironically, a few people nearby chuckled. It wasn't a particularly witty joke, but the sheer unexpectedness of the moment, the sudden shift in dynamics, seemed to disarm them. Suddenly, I wasn't the wayward daughter with the questionable life choices. I was the mysterious cousin whose fiancé arrived in a manner befitting a movie scene. As Rohan was drawn into conversations by curious uncles and second cousins who suddenly found aerospace engineering fascinating, I took a moment to breathe. The surrealness of it all settled over me. For years, I had walked into rooms like these, steeling myself for the inevitable questions and veiled criticisms. Now I felt a quiet strength, a sense of finally being seen, not for who they expected me to be, but for who I was and who I was with. My cousin Nikhil, still basking in the glow of his own speech, made his way towards me during dessert. He had a slightly smug look on his face. So, he said, gesturing towards Rohan, who was now surrounded by a small group of captivated relatives. That's your guy, huh? I looked at him, feeling a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Yes, I said. That's Rohan. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. Honestly, didn't think he was real. Yeah, I said, holding his gaze. A lot of people didn't. He paused, perhaps expecting me to elaborate, perhaps preparing some cynical follow-up. But I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked away, needing a moment to myself, needing to check on Priya. To her credit, Priya seemed genuinely delighted by Rohan's dramatic entrance. She had always been quietly supportive, a grounding presence in the sometimes turbulent landscape of our extended family dynamics. She was graceful, kind, and possessed a quiet strength that I admired. I found her on the dance floor, beaming, momentarily free from the pressures of being the perfect bride-to-be. I hugged her tightly. You were amazing, I whispered. So were you, she replied, squeezing my hand. You have no idea how satisfying that was to watch. Best moment of the night. I wasn't trying to upstage you, I said, meaning it. You didn't, she laughed softly. You just reclaimed your place, and it was about damn time. Later in the evening, my mother pulled me aside near the grand staircase leading down to the valet. She looked unsettled. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a look of genuine confusion and perhaps a flicker of curiosity. Ah, Nanya, she said, her voice lower than usual. Why didn't you tell us he was coming? I shrugged. It felt like a lifetime of unspoken frustrations condensed into that one small gesture. Would it have changed anything? She hesitated, looking down at her hands, then back at me. I didn't realize. What didn't you realize, Mom? I asked, my arms crossed, my voice devoid of the usual conciliatory tone I used with her. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a long time. It felt like. Her gaze was searching, perhaps for the girl she thought she knew, the one who would eventually come around to their way of thinking. I didn't realize he was this serious. And there it was, the quiet admission that cut through years of doubt and dismissal. The weight of every conversation we hadn't had, every time I'd tried to explain my life, my choices, and been met with concern, skepticism, outright disbelief. The way they had made me feel like I was failing at adulthood, because I wasn't following their script. But she was trying now. Clumsily, slowly, but trying. I'm glad you came, she added after a pause. Me too, I said, and I meant it. Not for them. For me. Rohan found me a little while later on the rooftop garden, attached to the venue. It was quiet up there, away from the music, the chatter, the lingering eyes. The city skyline glittered in the distance, a million tiny lights against the inky sky. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. How'd it go? He asked softly. I leaned back against him, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth of his presence. Better than I expected, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. Worse than it should have had to be. He didn't say anything for a moment, just held me tighter. Then they'll catch up, he said finally. I'm not waiting, I replied. I know, he said, and I knew he did. He understood the years of struggle, the quiet battles I had fought within myself and with my family. We stood there for a long while, the music from the party below a distant hum. The air was cool and still. I didn't know what would happen next with my family. whether this night would truly change anything, whether they would try harder. But I knew this, for once they had seen me. And more importantly, in their eyes, I had seen myself, reflected not in their doubt, but in my own strength. Rohan and I stayed on that rooftop until almost everyone had left. The party dwindled into that awkward post-celebration phase, the air thick with the scent of wilting flowers and lingering perfume. We watched it all from above, like spectators of a play we no longer needed to perform in. Eventually, we came down to say goodbye to Priya and Samir. They were on the dance floor again, slightly tipsy, radiating a happy, easy glow. They hadn't had to fight for their happiness, for acceptance. They had simply walked the path laid out for them. I hugged Priya again. "You did great," I told her. "So did you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Seriously, Anya, that was epic." We both laughed. Samir offered Rohan a fist bump, a gesture of easy camaraderie. Rohan returned it with that calm, collected confidence he always carried. As we walked towards the valet line, I could feel my parents' eyes on us from across the room. They didn't approach us. My father gave a polite nod. My mother offered Rohan a thin-lipped smile that almost passed for warmth. It was fine. I wasn't expecting a dramatic transformation. Not overnight. But I knew something had shifted. Perhaps not dramatically, but subtly, irrevocably. The ground had moved a little. When we got back to the hotel, I peeled off my sari, the heavy silk suddenly feeling like a costume I was shedding. I wiped the smudged kohl from under my eyes and collapsed onto the bed with a dramatic groan. "That bad?" Rohan asked, already halfway out of his suit jacket, his tie tossed onto the armchair. "Not bad," I said, staring up at the ceiling. "Just heavy. You ever walk into a room where everyone's pretending you're invisible, and then suddenly they're trying to memorize your resume?" He chuckled, walking over to the bed and lying down beside me. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "Most rooms, actually." I laughed too. That was one of the many reasons we worked. He understood, without needing lengthy explanations, the subtle dynamics, the unspoken judgments, the constant need to prove yourself in a world that had already made up its mind about you. "Do you regret it?" he asked after a pause. "What?" I turned my head to look at him. "Tonight? Coming." I propped myself up on my elbows. "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "Not even for a second." Because the truth was, even with all the tension, the passive-aggressive commentary, the years of being sidelined and misunderstood, this moment, this shift, was something I had needed. Not to validate my life or my relationship, but to confront the unspoken narrative that had been hanging over me for years. To say, without saying a word, "Here I am. This is my life, and it is real." Rohan lay beside me, one arm behind his head. "You didn't need me to prove anything," he said quietly. "You already did." "Maybe," I conceded. But still it helped. The next few days were strange. There was no explosive fallout, no big confrontation, no sudden invitations for dinner or emotional apologies. Just small things. My father sent me a link to an article about architectural design in Dubai, with a note that said, "Reminds me of one of the projects you mentioned." Interesting read. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged my profession in that way. My mother sent a message in the family group chat with a photo from the engagement party, one of Rohan and me standing together, smiling. The caption read, "Look who finally made it into the family album." It was a small gesture, almost insignificant, but for my mother, it was a monumental step. It was the first time she had ever publicly acknowledged Rohan's existence. My Aunt Priya's mother, the one who had laughed the loudest about the imaginary fiancé joke, sent me a Facebook friend request. She even liked 3 of my old travel photos from Jordan and Croatia, places she had previously dismissed as too far and too dangerous. Even Nickel texted. "Nickel, hey, sorry if Eve been a J*RK. That was impressive." Me. "Not sure if that's an apology or a TED Talk intro." "Nickel, let's go with both." I didn't respond right away, but I saw it for what it was. An olive branch, wrapped in typical older brother sarcasm. A grudging acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't completely messed up my life after all. One afternoon, before we flew back to Dubai, I visited my childhood home in New Jersey for a quick drop-off. My mother had left a few things for me to pick up, some old jewelry, a shawl that had belonged to my grandmother, a pressure cooker she insisted was too valuable to ship overseas. Rohan stayed in the car, scrolling on his phone, while I went inside. The house looked and smelled exactly the same, a comforting, sometimes stifling, blend of incense, spices, and familiar furniture polish. The framed family portraits in the hallway had been updated. Newer ones included Priya and Samir, beaming during their engagement ceremony. And then I saw it, a recent addition. A photo of Rohan and me at the engagement party, standing side by side, smiling. I stopped, staring at it. Did you print this? I asked when my mother came into the hallway. She followed my gaze, her expression unreadable. Priya emailed it to me, she said. I liked it. It's a nice picture. It was. There was a long silence, filled only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. She adjusted a vase on the console table, even though it was perfectly in place. Ah, Nanya, she said finally, her voice quiet. I may have misjudged. I didn't say anything, just waited. He seems thoughtful, she added. Kind. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest we had ever gotten. A crack in the wall that had stood between us for years. I never needed you to be impressed, Mom, I said, my voice soft. I just needed you to stop assuming I was lying. For once, she didn't argue. She just looked at the photo, then back at me. You've always done things differently, she said. That's hard for us to understand. But maybe different doesn't mean wrong. It was a moment, an incomplete one, still fraught with years of unspoken history, but a moment nonetheless. I took the box she handed me, hugged her briefly, a quick, slightly awkward embrace, and left before either of us could ruin it by saying too much. When I got back to the car, Rohan glanced at me. You okay? I nodded, a small smile on my face. Yeah. He didn't push for more. That was another reason I loved him. He knew that sometimes silence was the loudest kind of peace. We flew back to Dubai a few days later. The trip had been emotionally draining, in ways I hadn't fully processed until we landed back on our own turf, the warm, dry air hitting my face, the familiar hum of Arabic and English blending in the background. The city was noisy, alive, and unapologetically bold, so unlike the quiet, tiptoeing version of myself I often became in my parents' world. Rohan and I didn't talk about the engagement party for a while. We didn't need to. The trip had done what it needed to do. We returned to the rhythm we knew. Late dinners on the balcony overlooking the city lights, weekend trips to the marina, flights to meetings in Riyadh or Paris. We were back to being us. But something lingered. Not bitterness, not even the desperate need for approval anymore. It was the itch of unfinished business. Back in New Jersey, my parents had taken tiny, hesitant steps towards acknowledging my life, but they still didn't truly understand what I had built, what it had cost me. For years, they had mocked and doubted, confident in the superiority of their own path. They didn't think I was capable of making something real, something entirely my own. And I didn't just want them to come around. I wanted them to watch me win. Loudly, undeniably. And that's where the idea came from. A few months after our return to Dubai, Rohan and I were invited to speak at a high-profile business summit. Rohan was giving a talk on the future of aviation logistics in emerging markets. I was being honored for my branding consultancy, which had just hit a significant milestone after signing a contract with a major luxury conglomerate. They wanted a speaker to talk about building personal brands across cultures, scaling a business without traditional VC funding, and navigating unconventional paths to success. They picked me. I told them I would do it on one condition, that I could invite personal guests. The event planners, eager to have me speak, readily agreed. I sent 2 priority invitations to my parents in New Jersey. I included a short, handwritten note. You once asked if I was serious about my life, it read. I'd like to show you what serious looks like. They didn't reply for 3 days. I didn't chase them. I didn't ask. I just waited. Then I got a text message from my mother. Mom, we'll be there. When they arrived in Dubai, Rohan picked them up at the airport in our electric car. Not the helicopter. We had done that already. He took them to our home, a sleek three-bedroom apartment overlooking the Palm Jumeirah, with floor-to-ceiling windows and an open-plan kitchen that flowed seamlessly into the living space. My mother's eyes darted around the apartment, taking in the modern art on the walls, the Moroccan tile work in the guest bathroom, the panoramic view from the balcony. My father, ever more reserved, tried not to show his reaction, but I could see it in the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of his lips. Surprise, disbelief, recalibration. They hadn't pictured this. They had pictured me in some small, cluttered apartment, struggling to make ends meet, perhaps living like a bohemian expat with mismatched furniture and student loan debt. Not someone who hosted investor dinners on her rooftop and signed non-disclosure agreements with billion-dollar clients. The next night at the summit, I stood on stage in a crisp white tailored pantsuit, my hair pulled back, every inch the woman I had fought to become. I told my story, not about the family drama, not directly, but about the rejection, the resilience, the quiet determination that had fueled me. About being underestimated, about having the audacity to believe that my work was valid, even when no one else did. I talked about building my own table when no one offered me a seat. And my parents were in the front row. My mother had tears in her eyes. My father clapped a beat longer than anyone else after I finished speaking. After the talk, people flooded towards the stage. Entrepreneurs, executives, even minor royalty from the region. They wanted to congratulate me, to ask questions, to network. My father stood nearby, shaking hands like he was at one of his own business conferences, a strange mix of pride and bewilderment on his face. That night, over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the fountains, my mother turned to Rohan. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, sincere. "Thank you for standing beside her, for believing in her when we didn't." Rohan smiled politely. He didn't say you're welcome, because it wasn't about them anymore. The real victory wasn't making them jealous, or even gaining their approval. It was making their doubt irrelevant to my success. Their lack of belief hadn't held me back. It had, in a strange way, propelled me forward. It was satisfying, deeply satisfying, to see the doubt in their eyes replaced by awe. To watch them finally realize that I hadn't just landed on my feet. I had soared. Later that week, before they flew back to New Jersey, my father pulled me aside on the balcony of our apartment. The city lights twinkled below us. "Ah, Nanya," he said, his voice quiet, hesitant. You've done well." I looked at him. This man who had once told me that art and design were hobbies, not careers. Who had offered to pay for me to go back to business school just a few years ago because he was worried I wouldn't be able to support myself. "I didn't see it before," he continued, looking out at the sprawling city. "But you've built something. Something real." "I know," I said, my voice steady. He nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible movement. Then he added, the words quiet but clear in the night air, "I'm proud of you." It had taken 32 years to hear him say that. And by the time he said it, I didn't need it anymore. My validation came from within, from Rohan, from the life we had built together. But I welcomed it all the same. It was a moment of quiet reconciliation, a softening of the hard lines that had defined our relationship for so long. That, to me, was the best kind of outcome. Not revenge, not gloating, but simply being seen. And in seeing me, perhaps they had learned to see themselves and the world a little differently too. It wasn't the helicopter or the speech or the business class tickets or the view from my apartment. It was growing into the person they never imagined I could be, and then giving them a front row seat to witness it. But life, as it always does, kept moving. The glow of that moment of quiet acknowledgement didn't magically erase the years of doubt, the ingrained patterns of interaction. There was still an underlying tension, a sense that while they were impressed by the outward markers of my success, the apartment, the business, Rohan's profession, they still didn't fully grasp the essence of me. The journey I had taken, the sacrifices I had made. They saw the result, but not the struggle. The calls and texts became more frequent after their visit. My mother would forward me articles about Dubai, about architecture, about successful Indian women in business. My father would ask more detailed questions about my company. my clients, my plans for growth. The skepticism hadn't vanished entirely, but it had morphed into a sort of hesitant curiosity. They were trying, in their own way, to bridge the gap. It was still conditional, though. The approval felt tied to my achievements, to the visible signs of success. If I'd been struggling, if my business hadn't taken off, would they have been so quick to bridge that gap? The thought lingered, a quiet shadow in the background. It made it hard to fully relax, to completely let go of the feeling that I was still, in some way, performing for their approval. Rohan saw it, of course. He saw everything. One evening, we were having dinner on our balcony, the city lights a breathtaking backdrop. I was recounting a conversation with my mother, a conversation that had felt productive on the surface, but left me feeling subtly drained. It's like they're proud, I said, picking at my food, but they still don't get it. They don't understand why I chose this path, what it means to me beyond the money or the prestige. It's still framed through their lens of what success should look like. Rohan reached across the table and took my hand. They're trying, Anya, he said, his voice gentle. It's a big shift for them. They had a very specific vision for your life. Watching you build something completely different, something they didn't anticipate or approve of initially, it takes time for them to process that. I know, I sighed. And I appreciate the effort. I really do. But it's exhausting, Rohan. Constantly feeling like I still have to prove myself, even after all this. You don't have to prove anything to them anymore, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. You proved it to yourself. That's the only validation that truly matters. He was right, of course. Intellectually, I knew he was right. But the emotional residue of years of feeling misunderstood, of being the difficult child who wouldn't conform, was hard to shake. It was a part of my identity, woven into the fabric of who I was. We decided to take a break from the intensity of family dynamics and travel for a bit. Rowan had a project in Kyoto, and I could work remotely. The change of scenery was exactly what I needed. Kyoto was ancient and beautiful, a world away from the glittering modernity of Dubai and the familiar, sometimes suffocating, expectations of New Jersey. Exploring ancient temples, wandering through bamboo forests, and simply being in a place where my history wasn't constantly under a microscope allowed me to breathe a little easier. While we were there, an opportunity arose that felt significant. A major Japanese art and design museum was looking for a branding consultant to help them reach a younger, more international audience. It was a challenging project, one that required a deep understanding of cultural nuances and a fresh, innovative approach. It was also exactly the kind of project that would have been dismissed as frivolous by my parents years ago. I pitched for it, pouring all of my passion and expertise into the proposal, and I got it. It was a major win for my company, a validation of my skills and my unconventional approach to design and branding. When I called my parents to tell them the news, the conversation felt different. My father asked about the scope of the project, the budget, the timeline. He asked practical, business-oriented questions, the kind he would ask about one of his own ventures. My mother, after expressing her excitement about Japan, asked about the cultural aspects of the project, the artistic elements. It wasn't just about the prestige. They seemed genuinely interested in the work itself. It was a small shift, but a meaningful one. It felt less like they were impressed by the outward success, and more like they were beginning to appreciate the substance of what I did. Life continued to unfold. My business thrived. Rohan's career took him to new heights. We built a life together in Dubai, a life that was entirely our own, shaped by our choices, our dreams, our shared values. It wasn't the life my parents had envisioned for me, but it was a life I had built, and it was a good one. The conversations with my parents slowly, subtly, changed further. The questioning tones became less frequent, replaced by genuine interest. The subtle jabs about my imaginary life vanished entirely. They started asking about Rohan, not just his profession, but about his family, his interests, his life outside of work. They even started referring to him as my husband, even though we weren't married yet, a small linguistic shift that felt monumental in its implications. We still had our moments, of course. There were still occasional reminders of the cultural gap, the generational differences, the unspoken expectations that still lingered in the air. But the underlying tension had lessened. The wall hadn't completely disappeared, but it had softened, become more permeable. One year, we decided to spend the holidays in New Jersey. It was the first time Rohan and I had spent an extended period of time with my family since the engagement party. I was nervous, bracing myself for a return to the old dynamics. But it wasn't like that. My parents welcomed Rohan warmly. They listened to his stories about his work, about his travels. My mother cooked his favorite dishes, ones I had told her about over the years. My father engaged him in conversations about global economics and technological advancements, treating him as an equal, a peer. We spent time with Priya and Samir, with Nikhil and his family. It wasn't a perfect, worthy reconciliation. There were no grand apologies or dramatic pronouncements. It was quieter than that. It was in the shared meals, the easy laughter, the comfortable silences. It was in the way my mother would sometimes look at Rohan and me, a soft, knowing smile on her face. One afternoon, my mother and I were sitting in the garden, drinking tea. The conversation drifted to the past, to my decision to pursue design, my move to London, my relationship with Rohan. We were just worried, Ananya, she said, her voice quiet, reflective. We had a certain idea of what would make you happy, what would keep you safe and secure. It was hard for us to see you deviate from that. We didn't understand. I know, Mom, I said, taking her hand. It was hard for me too, to feel like I was constantly disappointing you. You never disappointed us, she said, meeting my gaze. We were just scared, I think. Scared for you, because your path was so different from what we knew. It wasn't a full apology, but it was an acknowledgement. An understanding that their actions had come from a place of fear, however misguided, rather than malice. It was enough, more than enough. The wedding, when it happened a year later, was a beautiful, joyous affair. We chose to have it in Italy, a place that held special meaning for both Rohan and me. My family came, my parents, Nikhil and his family, Priya and Samir. It wasn't a traditional Indian wedding, but it incorporated elements of both our cultures, a reflection of the life Rohan and I were building together. My parents seemed more relaxed than I had ever seen them at a family event. They laughed, they danced, they mingled with Rohan's friends and colleagues from all over the world. My father gave a heartfelt speech, not about my accomplishments, but about my spirit, my independence, my ability to carve my own path. My mother, tears in her eyes, embraced Rohan, welcoming him into our family not just with words, but with genuine warmth. Standing there, next to Rohan, surrounded by the people we loved, both the ones who had always believed in us and the ones who had come around, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of pain, of feeling utterly alone. But I had persevered. I had stayed true to myself. And in the end, I hadn't needed their approval to build a happy, fulfilling life. But having their love, their acceptance on my own terms, felt like a quiet bonus. Life continued to evolve. Rohan and I welcomed our first child, a daughter, into the world. Holding her in my arms, looking into her tiny face, I made a silent promise to myself. I would support her dreams, whatever they were. I would believe in her, even when she chose a path I didn't understand. I would create a home where she felt seen, heard, and loved unconditionally. My parents were overjoyed to become grandparents. They visited often, their interactions with me and Rohan filled with a newfound ease and affection. They doted on our daughter, their faces softer, their laughter more frequent. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer cast a shadow over the present. It had become simply a part of our story, a chapter that had shaped us but no longer defined us. My career continued to flourish. I expanded my consultancy, taking on projects in new industries, new parts of the world. Rohan's work remained challenging and exciting. We navigated the complexities of two demanding careers, parenthood, and maintaining our relationship across time zones and continents. It wasn't always easy, but it was our life, and we had built it together. One evening, a few years after our daughter was born, my mother called me. It was late in New Jersey, early morning in Dubai. She sounded tired, but her voice was soft. Ananya, she said. I was looking through old photo albums today. I waited, wondering where this was going. I saw pictures of you when you were little, she continued. So full of energy, so determined. You always knew what you wanted, even then. I guess so, I said, a small smile forming on my face. We tried to mold you, she said, her voice tinged with regret, into what we thought you should be, what we thought would make you safe and happy. I know, Mom, I said softly. We were wrong, she said, the admission hanging in the air between us. We were wrong to doubt you, wrong to not see you for who you were becoming. Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't something I had ever expected to hear. You built such a beautiful life, Ananya, she said, her voice thick with emotion. A life you created for yourself. And Rohan, he's a good man. He sees you. He cherishes you. He does, I whispered, a tear finally tracing a path down my cheek. I'm proud of you, she said again, the words carrying more weight, more sincerity than they ever had before. So proud. We talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing easily, openly. It was a moment of true connection, of finally bridging the emotional distance that had separated us for so long. It wasn't just about acknowledging my success anymore. It was about acknowledging me, the person I was, the choices I had made, the strength it had taken to stand firm in my truth. The years that followed were marked by a quiet ease in my relationship with my parents. The lingering tension dissipated. They became a constant, supportive presence in my life, cheering me on, doting on their grandchild, offering advice rooted in love rather than fear. The past wasn't erased, but its sharper edges had been smoothed away by time, understanding, and a shared history that, despite its challenges, had ultimately led us to a place of deeper connection. My journey wasn't unique. So many of us carry the weight of unspoken expectations, of dreams that don't align with the paths laid out for us. My story is a testament to the power of staying true to yourself, of building your own world, even when the world around you doubts your ability to do so. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of defiance are the quiet ones, the persistence, the resilience, the unwavering belief in your own worth, even when others struggle to see it. And as for the imaginary fiancé, well, he turned out to be more real and more wonderful than any of them could have ever imagined. He was the anchor in my storm, the quiet strength that allowed me to weather the doubts and build a life that was authentically, unapologetically mine. And in the end, that was all the validation I ever truly needed. The story is not yet over, and there are more chapters to unfold in Anya's life. The evolving dynamics with her family, the challenges and joys of raising a daughter while building a global career, and the continued strength of her relationship with Rohan. But for now, this is where her journey has led her.